start the recording. So we had started off with, of course, thou shalt not be a selfish pig was our first lesson. And then we talked about thou shalt cut the apron strings. And then last week we talked about the importance of communication. And tonight we're going to talk about a very important aspect of things, and that is thou shalt make conflict thy ally. Conflict thy ally. So you want to make conflict your friend in marriage. Kind of talked this morning about people that are all at war with each other. Marriage should never equal war. Some people think it that way, but really it shouldn't. There's jokes about, someone put in the bulletin or something, so-and-so and so-and-so got married, and so ends a friendship that began in childhood, well, it shouldn't be the end of your friendship just because you got married. He says here, conflict can destroy a marriage, but it also can bring fresh breezes and new life into the relationship. The marriage can become stronger through disagreements and adversity. Sometimes marriage is like a duel. When we learn how to successfully handle conflict, guess what? It becomes a duet, and the harmony produced from it is almost divine. So decide whether your marriage is going to be a duel or a duet. And just for the record, dueling has been illegal for many, many years. So we want it to be a duet. And it's interesting what people think of in conflict in marriage. Ed Young, he says, surely you and your wife never fight, do you? I wish I had a nickel for every person that has asked me that question and just a penny for all the others who actually believe it. I'd be a wealthy man. And he explains that, over 40 years of marriage, he and his wife, didn't exactly have everything worked out. So, I would have to say in my own experience, we've been blessed, really. God has blessed my wife and I. We have had so few disagreements over the course of our marriage. Major disagreements. I mean, we might disagree over minor things, whether you want gravy or ketchup on your fries, but when it comes to like the real things that cause conflict, we have had so very little issues in our marriage, and I'm blessed with a wonderful wife on that front. So maybe it's because we've learned how to handle disagreements. It's not that we don't disagree, but we read this chapter on our honeymoon, so we had a head start on a few things. But there's just so many couples that I hear from, and the atmosphere in their marriage is very different, that there is a lot of conflict. But I don't want to give the impression that, my wife and I never disagree. That's certainly not the case. And in fact, we both, can be very opinionated. We've had a few moments of intense fellowship, as one of my friends put it. So there's, intense fellowship can look different for different people, but there's times when you gotta kind of apologize for your tone or the way things were said and that sort of thing. But you can always work it out, when you handle conflict properly. And the fact is, we never stop growing in our relationships. And, there's always bumps along the road. There's always areas where conflict can arise. But having, a foundation of mutual respect and love for each other can certainly go a long way. No marriage is immune to conflict. Remember, in marriage, two separate individuals have joined to become one, so some friction and tension are certainly will take place at the intersection of their union. So 2 myths about conflict. The 4th commandment for a successful marriage is one that many couples question. That is, thou shalt make conflict thy ally. The reason couples question this commandment is because of a couple of prevailing marital myths. So as we begin, let me quickly explode those 2 myths. Number 1, good marriages do not have problems. Is anyone here, you're married, you've never had any problems? Not one? Okay, nobody's lining up to answer yes to that one. So that's not to say anyone here doesn't have a good marriage. Of course you do. But there's going to be problems. There's always problems in marriage. So he says, do you ever fight with your husband or wife? Do you quarrel with your mate? If so, congratulations. You have a perfectly normal marriage. Uh, some people think that two people in love will never suffer any kind of significant conflict. That's simply not true. Every married couple, no matter how well matched or how spiritually mature, will have conflict. It's a normal part of marriage. The question is, how do we handle our battles, fights, misunderstandings, disputes, and miscommunications? The right responses to that question will lead to a great relationship. And, you know, a lot of conflicts comes from, you know, any number of these things, but, you know, sometimes it's just a misunderstanding. You get people on the same page, they realize, oh, that wasn't what they said, or that wasn't what they meant, or misheard or misunderstood. And, you know, the whole thing could have been avoided if they'd simply slowed down and said, what did you say? Or what did you mean by that?
The right response is yes, dear.
Well, that's one danger, is that when couples that don't have conflict, someone's not being heard. If there's no conflict in a marriage, then that's an abusive relationship, because someone's getting their way all the time. And that's actually not a healthy relationship when someone's always getting their way. Number two, conflict hurts good marriages. Conflict does not have to hurt a solid marriage. In fact, conflict is an important part of every good marriage. Handled wisely, it can lead to greater intimacy. Handled poorly, it can lead to greater isolation. We can't choose whether we will have conflict, only how we will deal with it. So what will you choose, intimacy or isolation? In many ways, marriage is like two cold porcupines that move closer together for warmth. They will have conflict. I think we've used this analogy before recently. Of course, if the two porcupines were to stay by themselves, they could avoid all conflict, and they'd also stay cold. For the porcupine union to work, there has to be some negotiation. Some people think they have a good marriage because they never have any conflict. How do you think they manage that? I'll tell you how. They live independently of one another. You do your thing and I'll do mine. We'll get together every once in a while to deal with a few things, but by and large, we'll pursue separate and independent agendas. You're just roommates at that point. The closer you get to each other, the more you're going to rub each other the wrong way. If you keep someone at a distance, it's easy to not have conflict with them. You know, you're two ships passing in the night. You never really interact with each other. Well, of course you can avoid conflict. You never see each other. You never are in each other's space. But you get in someone else's space for a while and you're pursuing intimacy, there's going to be some back and forth, and there's going to have to be some trade-offs and negotiation and compromise to learn how to cuddle as porcupines. So you're going to feel each other's pricks a little bit. So anyone can avoid conflict by living like a solitary porcupine. But if you desire true intimacy, you have to make a decision together and move together, not in a duel, but as a duet. After all, two porcupines that move closer together must learn to relate to one another very carefully, or they will cause one another tremendous pain. It's out of this kind of conflict that real intimacy comes, resulting in a strong marriage. All marriages, the good ones and the bad ones, have problems. The difficulties in each type of marriage to closely resemble each other. The crucial difference lies in how a good marriage handles conflict. The Bible tells us to count it all joy, James 1 and 2, when trials and adversities come. Why count it all joy? Because conflict produces endurance, and endurance produces maturity. There's some great teaching out there on this, that God designed marriage, to help us grow and mature. Some of you may have heard of Prager University, or Prager U on YouTube, and they have a really great, hilarious video on this, and explaining why marriage isn't just a piece of paper, and the reason guys in particular resist commitment to marriage. And the reason is marriage forces you to grow up. You're going to have to take responsibility for your spouse. You're going to have to stop going out till 2 a.m. and, you know, hanging out with your friends and doing all kinds of wild partying and things like that. So there's marriage forces you to grow up. It forces you to mature. And a lot of guys don't want to grow up. So it was geared towards men, but it's true of ladies as well. But there's growth that comes from a deep, close relationship like marriage. It forces us to grow on a personal level. So good and bad conflict. I'm always astounded at the number of people I meet who actually believe marriage will fix their lives and make everything just right. Here's a guy who has difficulty with friends, clashes at work, trouble in school, and poor family relationships, but by getting married, he thinks everything will turn out great. Or a girl who thinks that by saying I do, her life will turn blissfully happy till death do us part. Where do we get such a foolish idea? Marriage is going to amplify all of those things. Any problems you had before with people, you're going to find a really great mirror in your spouse because now everything gets amplified. The Bible tells us that conflict goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. When sin entered this world, it negatively affected every relationship and every family. Nevertheless, as I've suggested, conflict in marriage is not always sin. The presence of problems, tensions, and arguments doesn't necessarily mean trouble for marriage. Ed Young goes on, he says, I believe that Adam and Eve had good conflict prior to their sin. I can't imagine Adam sitting there telling Eve what he had named all the animals and Eve not having a better idea once in a while. Can you? What did you name it an aardvark for? Like, there could be a better name than that, right? So you should have called it this or that. You know, differences of opinion aren't necessarily sinful. It just shows that people are unique and different. So there is both good and bad conflict. There is a constructive conflict and destructive conflict. Suppose a man has a friend named Jack who has a birthday coming up. He says to his wife, honey, let's not forget to send Jack a card. His birthday is next week. His wife replies, Jack is one of your best friends. I think you ought to get him a birthday present, not just a card. No way, he answered. Jack wouldn't want a present. We're grown men. A card will be more than adequate. But Jack isn't any old friend. He's your best friend, she responds. Remember, he also took you to the ball game last week. Oh, sure, Jack and I are close, he admits, but anything more than a birthday card just wouldn't fit. Listen, she insists, it's his 40th birthday, and that's a tough time for good old Jack. He's going through a real transition right now. I think if you did a little extra, it would be really nice. Wasn't he there when your dad passed away and he's been at your right hand all these years? So get him a present. I think it'll do him good. Let's stop the conversation at this point. Here we see a conflict arising out of a difference of opinion, not out of sin. So let's consider 3 ways such a conflict could be handled. First, the husband could say, you know, I think you're right. Jack is special, and it is his 40th birthday. What do you suggest we get him? Second, he could say, I don't think we need to get Jack anything for his birthday. We're adults for Pete's sake, but if it'll make you happy, go and buy him something and I'll give it to him. Well, now he's storming out of the house. Third, sorry. I'm absolutely opposed to getting Jack a birthday present. That's just stupid and childish. How ridiculous. He's my friend, not yours, so stay out of my life. Now I've got to go. You always bring up such crazy things when I'm in a hurry. And he storms out of the house. You have 3 different possible scenarios here. First scenario demonstrates a constructive response to conflict. The husband ponders his wife's suggestion, thinks my wife knows about things better than I do. She's a birthday person. She remembers all of them. So he says to her, I think you're right. His response encourages her to continue to offer advice, and most of us men need advice even when we won't admit it. The second approach just shuts her down. She gets her way. Jack gets a birthday gift, but the approach does more harm than good. She receives no encouragement to offer her husband any assistance in the future. If that's the way he's going to respond, she's going to keep her mouth shut next time. The third response is purely destructive. He banishes her from the battlefield and uses some terminal words to wound her spirit, such as ridiculous, stupid, crazy, and childish. So now you're putting some adjectives in there that are really tearing the other person down. John Gottman, a marriage researcher at the University of Washington, has studied conflict in marriage. With his wife, Julie, and research psychologist Sybil Carrere, Gottman developed criteria for predicting whether or not a marriage will survive. Gottman and his team reportedly can make the prediction within 3 minutes of assessing a couple, whether their marriage will survive or not. For more than 2 decades, the Gottman team has tracked 700 couples and can predict with 91% accuracy whether couples will divorce. By listening to how a couple argues, according to the specialist, you can tell if a marriage is going to make it. The evidence revealed that couples must take care how they communicate, especially when they argue and fight. In our illustration, the husband's third response fell into the destructive category, mainly because he attacked the person, not the problem. Over time, this type of response can be fatal to the marriage relationship. So how can we train ourselves to use the conflicts that inevitably come into every marriage for constructive rather than destructive purposes? Let's begin by considering some of the most important traps to avoid. So in conflict, there's a right way to handle it and a wrong way to handle it. And it usually boils down to what we say and how we say it. So we don't want to attack people, we want to attack problems. And Les and Leslie Parrott talk a lot about this, that a good fight, learning how to fight a good fight in marriage is when the two of you fight together for your marriage. You're on the same team. You're both fighting for a successful marriage. When you start to see your spouse as the problem, you're in trouble. So that's really important to remember. It's not your spouse. You're on the same team. You want to fight for your marriage, not fight each other. Because friendly fire is very dangerous in warfare. You don't want to be shooting members of your own team. So attack the problem, not the person. So destructive conflict uses several inappropriate weapons of war to win its battles. We can head off a lot of this type of conflict if you remember the following 7 don'ts. Number 1, don't be ashamed of your anger. Anyone who wants to be useful in this world will get angry. I love that quote. If you're going to be useful, you're going to get angry. If you never get angry, I doubt you've developed much as a person. Issues should matter. Your opinions and conclusions are important. Just remember, anger is not the issue. How you deal with your anger is. As we've already noted, many times in marriage, opposites attract. We see in that other person something we don't have but like. Often these differences are what bring the spark and creativity to a relationship. So what happens when a prize fighter marries a peacemaker? Here's a guy who grew up in a home that responds to conflict by bringing out the gloves. When a disagreement arose, his family would lay everything on the table and duke it out. Everybody told everybody else what they really thought, and that usually led to relational black eyes. His peacemaker wife is different. Every time conflict came to her family, everyone drew deathly quiet. Shh, don't mention it, don't bring it up, don't talk about it. Anything to keep peace in the family. So as an adult, she runs from any kind of conflict or confrontation. She sweeps it under the rug and refuses to admit it exists. Now what happens when they marry? You can probably imagine what happens when they marry. The prize fighter sees a problem and yells, "Let's deal with it." The peacemaker thinks, "Oh no, I don't want to deal with it. I'll do anything but that. I don't want to talk about it." So she withdraws and avoids the problem. Now, who gets in between the prize fighter and the peacemaker? Far too often, it's the little 6 or 7-year-old child. "Daddy, don't you know Mama doesn't like to fight?" "I don't care what your mama wants," he growls. Sometimes Junior takes Daddy's side. "Mama, don't you know that Daddy just wants to talk? You need to talk to him." "I don't want to talk about it," she says. "I can't talk about it." And soon the child can become a human ping pong ball between mom and dad. And they're trying to keep the peace in the home and be the negotiator that's helping out the marriage. And you should never put your kids in that situation. So the worst thing that can happen in this type of relationship is violence. It shatters the home, especially the children. Homes where exploitation and abuse exist tend to create homes of exploitation and abuse. It's a generational cycle. But there's no place for that ever. If your home suffers from this type of anger, seek out the help and counsel available in your church or community. And remember, even violent marriages can be healed with the aid of caring individuals and a loving and powerful God. I really believe that marriages that are destructive and abusive and all that, God can still heal that. We seem to live in a time where people assume that if there's abuse in a relationship, that it's over, that it's beyond hope. I don't believe that. I believe there's still hope, even in a relationship where abuse is taking place. If both individuals are willing to work on it, there is hope. Now, that doesn't mean that I say that anyone should remain in a situation where their safety is an issue. I fully believe that if safety is an issue, then separation is absolutely necessary. In fact, I would help the person separate. I would say, you need to get out of here. You need to get into a place where you're safe. But if at the same time, I would also encourage getting the help necessary to be able to heal what's behind all of that. So even violent marriages can be healed. Well, we shouldn't hide our anger. There's an appropriate way to express anger that has nothing to do with pushing or shoving or slapping or hitting. Anger is a good thing, not a bad thing. The Bible says, in your anger, do not sin. Or King James says, be angry and sin not. Be angry. You know, there's nothing wrong with being angry. It's when we start sinning as a result. You know, do not let the sun go down while you're still angry. Ephesians 4:26. So, and that's good advice for couples, especially. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. Don't stay angry. make sure that you're able to reconcile. Of course, one has to be mature to handle anger properly, and that's where so many of us miss the boat. We flare up, get angry, and attack the person instead of the problem. Arguments in which a husband and wife honestly express their anger can be therapeutic. When disagreements arise, we need to let our mates know that we love them, that it's time to get on with it and settle the dispute. This can be both good and healthy, so don't be ashamed of your anger. In fact, in that moment, it's not wrong to tell your spouse, you know what, I'm really angry right now. That's fine. Everybody gets angry. And because I'm angry, maybe we should delay this conversation, or maybe we need to talk it out, depending on the situation. But again, don't allow anger to cause you to sin. And I've got the picture of the Roman Colosseum behind me. That's not intentional about when we talk about conflict in marriage. Don't be gladiators. There's really no sense in that. So that brings us to our next one. Don't call in heavy artillery or use deadly weapons with your spouse. While expressing anger can promote a healthy relationship, remember that you're not in this thing to wipe out your spouse. You don't want complete unconditional victory. Nobody wins in that scenario. Those who fail to figure this out inflame their conflicts, leading to greater isolation instead of greater intimacy. So leave some room to maneuver. If your goal in an argument is to win at the expense of your spouse, that's not good. You don't want them to feel like they've come out of this conversation having lost. You want to feel like you've come out of it having reached an agreement, a compromise, or some way to figure things out together, because you're both working together on your marriage. So again, you're not there to see the other one lose. Moving on. It gives the example of smart bombs and warfare and different things. He says, sometimes we get into an argument with our mate, we call in the heavy artillery. But instead of the smart bombs, we send off the errant and unpredictable Scud missiles of the enemy. I'll leave, we yell. We'll get a divorce. We mimic television couples we've seen go ballistic. The TV husband gets up after saying about 3 words and storms out, slams the door. And real husbands thinks, no, that's the manly way to handle conflict. No, it isn't. That's the cowardly way to handle conflict. You just ran away. That's not the right thing to do. Listen carefully. Have the courage to deal head on with whatever troubles are made. Anybody can run. Cowards do it all the time. So again, this is where I would say for any couple in any discussion, no matter how intense it gets, there's certain words that need to be banned. Divorce is one of them. Never mention divorce in a conflict. Never, ever, ever. If you want a divorce, wait till you've cooled off and talk about it then. But never bring it up in a conflict. That is so destructive. It undermines the whole commitment that your marriage is based on. And I've seen so many couples that, they're telling me, they're having conflict and they keep talking about divorce and threatening to leave and all this kind of thing. Don't do that to your marriage. Never mind your spouse. It's your own marriage that you're attacking at that point. So that is just so destructive. Just commit to never saying those things in a conflict. Number 3, this is related. Don't air your dirty linen in public. Ed Young says, a few years ago, I read about a disastrous wedding reception at the Blue Dolphin Inn in Southern California. Right in the middle of the reception, while 300 guests happily talked and reminisced about the young couple, the bride and groom broke out into a violent argument. Eventually, the groom grabbed part of the wedding cake and threw it in the face of his bride. Kapow! Immediately, food fights and fist fights broke out between the families, friends, and members of the wedding party. Bedlam reigned. By the time the police arrived, the bride and groom had disappeared. Imagine. This may be an extreme illustration, but it points out the dangers of airing your dirty linen in public. Don't discuss your private conflicts in front of friends, family, or business associates. Also, don't inappropriately pour out your heart to your friends or your parents or some other confidant. This will hurt your mate and do nothing to help resolve normal marital conflict. Remember, conflict is normal. So just because you're having a conflict, if you start talking to other people about that conflict and putting your spouse in a negative light, well, now you're creating camps. You think about this wedding ceremony where all the guests started into literal fistfights with each other. defending their side. That's dangerous. And the problem is when you do that and then you go make up with your spouse and your family members haven't made up with each other. So now you still have family members who won't talk to each other, even though it was 3 years ago, you and your spouse had some spat and you talked about it. There's dangers here. Keep it quiet, keep it private. That brings us to number 4, don't paint yourself into a corner. Too many of us paint ourselves into a corner by our poor choice of words. If you don't stop, we say, I'll get a lawyer. We use big, broad, sweeping statements and threats to control our mate. We reach way back into our arsenal and drag up something we've dealt with before and bring it into the battle. All's not fair in love and war. If marriages had referees, they blow the whistle or throw the flag on this tactic. Don't paint yourself into a corner. Don't maneuver yourself into a position from which there is no retreat. So that's, again, just extremes in conflict. People, they get arguing and they start saying all these extreme things, and it's stuff that you definitely don't want to have to follow through on in a calmer, rational moment. You're gonna realize that was not the right thing to do or say. So don't let your emotions get the better of you and cause you to say things you don't mean. And definitely don't paint yourself into a corner. Number 5, how do I say this carefully? Don't use the turtle approach. When a turtle encounters a problem, he climbs into his shell, hunkers down, and stays there. A lot of us become turtle-like in the face of marital conflict. We grow silent. Of course, a little silence may be good. Sometimes we need to back up and think a minute. Sometimes we need to walk away and say, time out, let's have a truce. But that's not the turtle approach. The turtle approach says, I'm going to remain silent. I'm not going to say anything until she apologizes. I'm not going to respond until he responds. So the two of you sleep side by side in bed, about 6 inches apart, doing your best to not even touch one another. Too many of us refuse to face the little conflicts of marriage. We won't get them out into the light and talk about them. Over time, our molehills grow into ominous mountains. So avoid the turtle approach. I've never yet met a turtle with a good marriage. I know it's a struggle for those that, peace at any cost. You don't want conflict, but that actually makes the conflict worse. Turtling in and just waiting for everything to blow over, it doesn't solve the problem. It's still there. So this is where proper conflict resolution can go a long way. Number 6, don't keep a chip on your shoulder. Some of us handle conflict with a chip on our shoulder. We overstate things. We take a little situation, generalize it, make it sound as if it's been the situation from the very beginning. We act like the wife in the middle of a battle who looked at her husband and said, you have every characteristic of a dog except one. Which one is that? Loyalty. Humorous, but way too strong. That's a huge overstatement. But some of us do exactly that when we're angry. We keep the chip on our shoulder and allow ourselves to spin out of control. And here's the problem. Never use terms like you always or you never. If you're writing a list of things to never say in an argument, just add that to the list. So you're not going to use the word divorce. You're not going to threaten to leave. And you're not going to use terms like always or never, because you're wrong on both fronts. To say someone always does this or never does that is too extreme. So much of the time they may do this or that, or they may occasionally forget to do this or that, but it's never always or never. It's too extreme to characterize someone by one choice they've made and say that's them all the time. Again, way too strong. Number 7, don't use sex as a weapon. Some use sex as a tool of punishment or reward. They might say to their mate, I'm not going to make love to you until we get things worked out. But when sex becomes a weapon of manipulation, the whole physical relationship degenerates. Many a husband grows angry and depressed because he feels as though he has to earn his wife's affection. The danger here is that such a weapon can spark an arms race. Too many husbands have said, I'll show you, I'll find love in the arms of another woman. And it's also the other way around, it's not just men. Jesus meant it when he said, all those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword. So careful on that front. In fact, I would say in conflict, sex is irrelevant. That if or maybe even to the opposite, that's one way to affirm love for your spouse while you're still working on issues. That you can let them know, look, I still love you. I still want to be with you. And we haven't worked things out just yet, but I'm not going to let that stop us from continuing to show love for one another and intimacy and all those sorts of things. So it's a way to affirm that, yes, you still love each other, even though you're dealing with some issues. That can be a great way to keep that foundation of love going while you work out differences. So don't use sex as a weapon. In fact, turn it inside out, use it the other way around to affirm your love for your spouse while you work out differences. Let's look at 4 stages of heart hurt. When we deal with conflict the wrong way, tension continues to build in the home until we progress through 4 stages of hurt. Each stage can lead to greater alienation between husband and wife. So number 1 is the wounded heart. We all know something about this stage. Our mates have wounded us and we've wounded them. Sometimes it happens intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. If we're sensitive at all, we can pick up our mate's signals and know when he or she feels wounded. We know when something's wrong, when things have gotten out of balance. No married person can honestly say, I've never known anything about the wounded heart. We've all accidentally or intentionally hurt our spouse, or they've hurt us. Ignore the wounded heart long enough and it turns into something else. So first of all, we need to be sensitive to the fact when we hurt each other, that there should be a sensitivity and a quickness to apologize, to make things right away. Number 2, the cold heart. During the second stage, a husband might recognize his wife's wounded heart, begin to talk to her, but without trying to resolve the conflict. Communication takes place, but it lacks any power to resolve the dispute. Usually such communication sounds overly nice. The couple may act indifferently toward each other. He's Mr. Cool, she's Mrs. Unflustered. The conflict doesn't bother me. So they avoid the issue and any meaningful contact with each other. The cold heart sets in. They're just, again, trying to cover up the problem, sweep it under the rug, whatever. Number 3, the hard heart. The third stage reflects serious trouble. In the hard heart stage, you begin to grieve the Holy Spirit. You have trouble praying. 1 Peter 3:7 talks about husbands, love your wives, do not be bitter against them, and so on. And Ephesians 4:30 as well. So we have this in 1 Peter, it says that your prayers be not hindered. That if we, let's actually look that up. I'm trying to remember the exact terminology here. So 1 Peter chapter 3, because this is such a key verse when it comes to marriage. 1 Peter 3, verse 7. Yeah, here it is. Husbands, likewise, dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. Don't let the way you treat your wife hinder your prayer life. God is watching how you treat your wife when you're praying. You want your prayers answered? He's going to say, well, how'd you treat your wife this week? That's sobering thought, isn't it? And, how did you treat your spouse? God's looking at that. We need to make sure that we're treating our spouse correctly. When you're not in a right relationship with your mate, how can you pray? Heaven seems blocked and God seems far away. At the hard heart stage, you're metallic and tough. As you go through the motions, you begin to wonder if your marriage will last. All kinds of conflict may break loose, but you're so hard and cold and businesslike, you really don't care. And that leads to the 4th and fatal stage. And number 4 is the apathetic heart. The opposite of love is not hate, but apathy. It's indifference, an attitude of I don't care. Ed Young says, through the years, I've counseled many couples. On several occasions, I've heard men bitterly declare how much they hated their wives or vice versa. They'd say they couldn't stand this or they despised that. After letting them talk a while, I'd say, you really love her, don't you? They would always look at me astonished and ask, how could you tell? Easy. It was because of their anger. They're passionate about it. There's hope for such a man or woman. If they're upset, that means they're emotionally involved. That, this has got their heart. This has got their passion. There's some real care and concern going on here. And, it may come out as anger, but it's because it matters. The problem is when they show nothing but apathy and indifference. He doesn't care, she doesn't care. Love seems gone and the marriage destroyed. How tragic. It's even more tragic because the marriage plummeted to the fourth stage over conflicts that didn't even amount to much most of the time. That, couples just, there's this gradual fade of caring for one another, and the passion fades. They just, whatever, they don't care anymore. And that's the danger stage in a marriage, that there's not much to hold it together at that point. So how to keep conflict constructive? So how do we have constructive conflict? We've talked about some things that we should not do. What are some things we can do? Let's get practical here. Between conflicts, sit down with your partner and determine the pattern of conflict in your marriage. Again, don't do this while the drums roll and everybody's choosing their weapons. This is not the time to do that. But do it when everyone seems relatively calm and peaceful. Say to one another, let's sit down and talk. Let's do some preventative maintenance. When my wife and I got married, my best man, Daniel McGraw, told a story of being in the grocery store and seeing a man with some flowers. And he goes up to the man, and he says, "Are you in trouble?" And the man replied, "No, this is preventative maintenance." And that's really good to have preventative maintenance in your marriage. It doesn't hurt to have a little bit, be a little ahead on the game on these sorts of things. So during what circumstances or times does conflict tend to surface in your marriage? Identify these areas of tension and discuss what you might be able to do about them. Again, I recommend SYMBIS or SYMBIS Plus on this front, because it will identify what your hot topics are and the top 5 things that will cause conflict in your marriage. So we do a survey and it comes back, and usually couples are pretty much in agreement on all 5, and we'll figure out what are the top 5 things that you shouldn't talk about when you're stressed or hungry or whatever. So that's a really good tool. Consider John and Mary. It seems that every time they go out together, World War III breaks out. She gets exhausted early and wants to go home while the evening is young. He's a slow starter and begins having a good time just about the time she feels dead on her feet. "Oh, let's go," she says. "No, let's stay a little longer," he replies. They go home angry almost every time they go out. What should they do? In a neutral moment, they need to sit down and analyze their patterns. They might decide that on the days they plan to go out for the evening, Mary will rest a little in the afternoon. Second, prior to leaving for any open-ended event like a party, they'll agree on a time to leave. It won't take long for them to understand that John is not trying to exhaust his wife, nor is Mary trying to squash her husband's fun. They realize their problem relates to varying body metabolisms and different personalities, so they agree upon a procedure that heads off future conflicts. How simple, right? It's just a matter of figuring out, why are we keep having the same conflict all the time, and what's a good compromise that we can work out. We could find workable solutions to our disagreements if we would only sit down and deal reasonably with them most of the time. You're going to find out why does this same thing keep causing conflict all the time? Is it, we talk about hot topics in marriage. Money is often a big one. Well, that can usually be solved with a budget. That's not a marriage issue, that's a budgeting issue. So, usually you can solve that. But many couples, you'd be surprised how many don't. They just try to not deal with things, and it's all preventable. And I would say that's true of many conflicts. They're preventable if you're able to identify patterns of conflict. Now, there are times when just something comes out of the blue and there's a conflict that erupts. But most of the time, this is not the first time you've had this discussion. So if it's not the first time, and you know it's going to cause conflict, you got to go back and say, well, what can we do about this? This is something that keeps coming up in our marriage. Let's work out a solution. And that's always a great way to prevent future conflicts. So suppose you've not yet practiced preventative medicine, the battle lines have already been drawn. What can you do when conflict explodes? So let's suggest several things. Number 1, talk and listen to God. Pray. Verbalize your conflict to God and listen for his response. So many times in moments of conflict, I begin to pray, "Oh Lord, change my children. Oh Lord, change my wife." When I finish my little plea, the answer often comes back, "I intend to, but let's start with your children's father and your wife's husband." We talked about it this morning in our Sunday school class. Where do wars and fightings come from among you? It's your own lusts that war on your members. It's our own selfish desires. Go back to number 1, thou shalt not be a selfish pig. It's the root of a lot of conflict is when we want to have our own way. And that's one of those things where we got to take it to God and say, God, I need you to change me. I need you to help me. I need you to give me patience. I need you to give me humility, the willingness to change. It's not them, it's me. It's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. It's not my brother, not my sister, but it's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. And if we could just have that humility and take things to the Lord and recognize, you know what? Yeah, it is me. I need help. I need the Lord to help. Number 2, try to understand your mate. This is huge. You say it's too tough to understand your mate. I really doubt that. He gives this interesting story. He says, we used to have a paper boy who came every morning at the same time like clockwork. The whole neighborhood could tell when Greg arrived on the scene, including the dogs. The canine crew seemed to come out of the woodwork. You wouldn't believe the barking, howling, and growling that erupted as they all headed for poor old Greg. He would take his papers or sticks or rocks or whatever he could find to beat off the dogs. Morning after morning, the same bedlam took place. One day, a new paper boy took over the route. At first, all the dogs rushed out as usual, growling and snapping and trying to get him like they had Greg. But this young man had a different plan. He began to speak to the dogs in a welcoming and friendly way. He knew they were all just pets, not really vicious. He figured out that the dogs sensed a challenge to the turf. He understood they felt frightened and insecure, so he began to pet one of the little beasts. A week went by and another canine got in on the petting. Finally, the toughest dog in the neighborhood became his best buddy. From that time on, all those vicious dogs would run out with their tails wagging whenever they heard the paper boy coming. They felt overjoyed to see him because they knew he was going to pet them. Now, surely we're as smart as the average paper boy. We need to understand our mates. What frightens her or agitates him? Just think a minute. Could it be your partner feels insecure or needs a little extra petting? That dog's barking, snarling, growling, and all he's just wanting somebody to pet him. Well, maybe that's your husband this week or your wife. I don't know. Try petting him first. See if he stops barking and snarling. So try to understand your spouse. What makes them angry or upset or irritable? Number 3, try to understand yourself. This may be the toughest assignment of all. Most of us are either too easy or too hard on ourselves. Ask yourself, why am I on edge today? Why did I say that? Why am I acting like this? What's going on in my life that has caused me to bring the office home with me or take my home to the office? In fact, I was doing this earlier this week. I had one day and I was by myself here at home and I was just feeling really angry. And I just had to stop myself and I said, why am I angry? What's causing this? Why am I feeling so upset? And I took it to the Lord in prayer and the Lord gave me an answer and I understood why. But it was just, I had to analyze my own emotions a little bit and say, I don't want to be angry. I don't even see a reason to be angry. So why am I angry? And, I just took it to prayer and I was able to come to an understanding. So that takes being a little bit more analytical with ourselves and saying, okay, I'm feeling angry right now. Why is that? A lot of times we don't bother to ask why. We're just like, well, I'm angry. That's it. But ask yourself, why? Why am I upset right now? What's got me feeling this way? And find a way to get to the root of it, and your spouse will love you for it because you're not taking it out on them anymore. But take it to God instead. Take it to prayer and seek to understand yourself. And there's also some great resources on this that, you can get counseling. A good counselor can kind of get to the bottom of things with you and help you to understand, what's the root of some of these emotions that can really take over sometimes. Be honest. And if you need help in understanding yourself, that's okay. Others sometimes see what we cannot. That's why the Bible says the purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding draws them out. Proverbs 20, verse 5. Find a man or if a wife, a woman of understanding, and ask this friend to help you see your strengths and your shortcomings. See if he or she can help you draw out the deep waters of your heart. And again, I recommend a good counselor, even if it's, a deeper issue. Number 4, talk to your mate. No relationship can thrive without regular and healthy communication. We talked about this last week, but when you talk, make sure you pick positive, edifying words. You know how most men and women respond to conflicts in their marriage? They react with harsh words. They retaliate. They offer insult for insult. For instance, why do you wear your wedding ring on the wrong finger, a wife asks. Because it reminds me I married the wrong woman, he replies. That's, these barbs go back and forth. We have a good marriage, says a wife, because both of us love the same man, you. All these insults. You love football more than you love me, a woman complains. Maybe so, her husband replies, but I love you better than baseball. As if that was a reason for her to get comforted. What do you and your husband have in common, a counselor wondered. One thing, the woman replied, neither of us can stand the other. That's what we've got in common. These statements may be humorous, but they help illustrate the lowest common denominator to which many marriages sink, exchanging insult for insult, injury for injury. If your spouse is throwing out insults and barbs, take the high road. The Bible says a soft answer turns away wrath. You can get into a pretty good verbal barrage back and forth, but at the end, it's destructive. It's not strengthening your marriage. Psalm 141:3 offers a better way. The psalmist asks the Lord to put a watch over his lips. We too need to pray, Lord, put a watch over my lips. Lord, be the keeper over my mouth. We could also use a dose of Proverbs 15:1, which says a gentle answer turns away wrath, as I quoted here a moment ago. We do not return insult for insult, but blessing for insult. We need to learn to trade sweet for bitter, so pick your words carefully. Again, what we say when we're angry can make a huge difference in the health of our relationships. We can be angry and sin not by choosing carefully what we say. And I would say a big part of being a Christian is learning how to restrain our emotions. When things get out of control in times of conflict, the temptation will be there to throw out insults and all this sort of thing, but instead choose to speak wisely, speak carefully, softly. A soft answer turns away wrath, and choose to say things that will de-escalate rather than escalate a conflict. Number 5, don't let the sun go down on your anger. We mentioned this earlier. Don't let your wrath fester. Don't let your anger get past the wounded heart stage. This doesn't mean you and your spouse agree on everything. It does mean you'll stay up late many nights, making sure you never go to sleep until you get your hearts together again. It's never advisable to have a hot, emotional discussion right before bed. It can be hard to sleep in that state of mind. So, if you're going to have a conflict, try to schedule it. And if you schedule it, then you can plan for it. You can say, we need to talk about this. We're not on the same page here. Let's get together at this time when we've both eaten and we've had some rest and we're able to be rational human beings. And let's discuss what we can do to find a solution, rather than waiting until a time of great conflict. So there's things you can do to just, you may not solve it before bed every night. Sometimes things it's too much. And, maybe you have to work the next morning, whatever. You can't stay up all night trying to solve a conflict and you get tired, whatever else. So just find a way to reaffirm your love for one another. Say, you know what, we're going to come back to this another time. We're not going to figure it out tonight, but just let your spouse know that you love them in spite of the fact that you haven't worked it out yet. And Ed Young says he and his wife, they do this little thing where, they go to bed and they might still be angry at each other, but they'll touch toes just to remind them that they still care, that there's still that foundation of love there. Number 6, make confession and forgiveness a priority. Once you've completed those 4 steps and touched toes, the next step is to say, honey, I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? These words allow conflict to open the door to a stronger relationship. So many times offering a little forgiveness is all it takes to bring a couple back together. In destructive conflict, one individual or another may win, but the marriage is a loser. So let's learn how to handle conflict in a constructive fashion. When we do, neither individual wins, but the marriage does, and our relationship grows stronger. So you want to do what's best for your marriage, not what's best for either one of you. It's interesting how conflict can often actually cause deeper intimacy. And the danger here is that you may feel tempted to create a fight so you can kiss and make up. And you might say, well, I'd never do that. But there are couples that's why they fight. It's so they can kiss and make up, because there's not much happening. So they figure, well, I got to start this ball rolling somehow. And, let's have a fight so we can kiss and make up. I think there's country music songs along those lines, but there's just, this whole idea. Well, you don't have to have a fight to kiss and make up. You can inject some romance without having the fight first. But yes, after a conflict, there can be a deeper level of intimacy and healing that can take place as you reaffirm your love for one another. So learn to control your reactions. You ever considered that your reactions may have a greater effect on your marriage than your actions? Actions remain vitally important, of course. We help or hurt those we love with our actions. But even if our actions are perfect, we can devastate our marriages through inappropriate reactions. For example, if I don't lie, cheat, commit adultery, steal, or get drunk, you could say my actions get an A+. But what if in a moment of conflict, I lash out with jealousy, hatred, or a spirit of revenge? In a very real sense, my reactions can cause more damage or create more harmony than my actions. So many times when we react inappropriately, we say, that really wasn't me. I admit I have a temper, but that was not the real me. I have news for you. That is the real me, and that is the real you. How we respond in conflict reveals the real person inside. Remember, Jesus said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And when does the heart overflow? In moments of conflict. In those intense emotional moments, when you're no longer controlling what's coming out of your heart and the real you shows through. Yeah, there may be some things in there that need to be repented of. What happens when you squeeze a lemon? Sour, bitter juice comes out. Did the squeezing make the lemon sour and bitter? No, the squeezing really brought out the sourness or bitterness already present. So when you're being squeezed in marriage, what's inside comes out. And this comes back to what I said earlier about how marriage will help us to mature. God uses marriage to help us to see how much we need him. And it's in those moments that we might have that, oh God moment, I need your help. I need you to change me. I didn't know that was in my heart, but my spouse just brought it out, or this conflict brought it out. Don't blame your spouse. It was the conflict. And you realize I need the help of the Lord to help me to grow past this. And there's a really interesting story that we'll close with here. This conflict comes into every marriage, but it's up to us to make sure it serves a constructive purpose. Conflict in the home can lead to endurance and a deepening of our relationship to both our spouse and to God, and that leads to maturity. A much-loved grandmother was celebrating her 50th wedding anniversary. One of her daughters asked, Mama, what is the key to the happiness and joy that you and Daddy have known through the years? Please tell everybody your secret. Well, she began, when your daddy and I first got married, I made a list of 10 things I would overlook about his personality, things I just didn't like. The day we walked down the aisle, I made a promise that when any of those 10 things came up, I would overlook it for the sake of marital harmony. Granny, one of her granddaughters, excitedly replied, please tell us that list. Tell us what those 10 things were. Well, honey, she answered, to be honest, I never did write it down. But every time your grandfather would do something to make me hopping mad, I would think, lucky for him, it's one of those 10 things. So what 10 things make you hopping mad about your own mate? What behavior or event tends to cause the most conflict in your home? Whatever those 10 things may be, you would be wise to use this grandmother's example. In fact, we all would be. Then we too would be on our way to a golden marriage. There's certain times you just got to overlook certain things. Remember, you can't change anybody. And what you see is what you get with your spouse much of the time. They're not going to change. That's what you got. You married them, you committed to stay with them. So when they keep acting like themselves, you're just going to have to realize, well, lucky for them. That's one of those 10 things I'm going to overlook. That you just choose to say, I'm not going to let that bother me. It rubs me the wrong way all the time. I hate it, whatever it is, but I'm just going to overlook. I don't know, there's a lot of comedians that have a field day with this kind of thing, but you know, maybe he just burps real loud every morning when he gets up or something. Maybe she, you know, does something that annoys you all the time with the way she does something. You just overlook. Just overlook it. And you know, there's areas where you just gotta have to realize we're never going to be on the same page with this, and you're just going to have to overlook it. So reflecting on your relationship, if you're married, how has conflict resulted in strengthening a weak point in your relationship with your spouse? So these are some self-reflective questions. Are you a peacemaker or a prize fighter? Explained. These are good questions to ask ourselves. How do you need to change to make conflict an ally rather than an enemy of your marriage? How can conflict strengthen your marriage rather than be a destructive force in your marriage? And I would say tonight, if conflict is a destructive force in your marriage, please take the time to really think about this and find a way to create constructive conflict in your marriage. That conflict can be a huge asset in strengthening your marriage if done properly. How did your parents handle conflict when you were growing up, and how has that pattern affected you? Oftentimes, growing up, we think whatever our parents did is normal. Well, chances are it wasn't. Because nobody's normal. Everybody's just different. So what we think is normal, because that's the way we grew up, and we marry someone else who grew up in a different home, they're going to think something else is normal. And that's really key to remember. So if you're contemplating or preparing for marriage, so you singles that are here, what conflicts or tension do you have at present in your relationship? If you believe there are no conflicts, perhaps you or your beloved are not being open about your attitudes, preferences, or feelings. Do you express your disagreements to each other? Why or why not? This is really a key thing. When couples are dating, everything's blissful. You know, it's all about all the stuff they enjoy doing together, and they love each other, and you know, they're just having this wonderful romantic time, and they never discuss things that they disagree on. You know, and it's okay. You're going to wait till you're married to bring up the fact that he wants kids and she doesn't, or vice versa. You might want to hammer out those disagreements before you get married, right? Discuss with your beloved those things that create tensions. Ask him or her to do the same. Together, plan strategies to deal with conflicts in the future. So again, it's very key things here. And thank you. If you're watching the recording, I'll end the recording.